Welcome to part two of religious language and myths. Let's talk about some common themes found in myths. First would be origin myths, or those that talk about how the world and how people and all of the other elements that we find in the universe and in Earth came to be. This, for example, is a view from the myth of Pangu. It was offered by Taoist monks hundreds of years after Lao Tzu, probably around 200 CE. And in this story, the universe begins as a cosmic egg. A god named Pangu, born inside the egg, broke it into two halves. The upper half became the sky, the lower half became the earth. As the god grew taller, the sky and the earth grew thicker and were separated further. Finally, the god died, and his body parts became the different parts of the earth. Another very common theme found in a number of myths around the world would be flood myths. And these point back to the idea that at some point in history, a great deluge, a great emptying of water around the earth that destroyed many things, including humankind. We know of the Great Flood story. We also know about the Epic of Gilgamesh and many other stories found in cultures, very old cultures, that talk about a flood having happened with humankind. The next theme in myths that's very common are the trickster myths. And tricksters play a kind of unique role in myths because they're neither all completely bad nor they all completely good. But tricksters have a common thing is that usually they are part human, part animal. They're very often able to change form. They're adventurers, gluttons, searchers of sexual pleasure, lazy and easily bored, dishonest and impulsive. But they have a function. Very oftentimes, tricksters are credited with creating or bringing into the world many elements such as fire or sun, but yet these often happen as a byproduct of some other activity of the trickster. Your text talks and goes into more detail about tricksters, but this is the Haida raven that's a common figure in many Native American myths. Another common theme found in myths is the hero myth. This is something that has been advanced by a number of scholars of religion and in more recent years gained attention again through the work of Joseph Campbell, who wrote the book A Hero with a Thousand Faces. And in this slide, we see Dorothy, Luke Skywalker, and Harry Potter all representing heroes in their own way. And we can look at some of the common themes or storylines that are part of this hero myth. The hero usually had some type of remote childhood where they were living away from their parents, very often may not have had knowledge of their parents, a very brief knowledge of their parents. There's a call to adventure that happens for the hero. There's a helper that comes along that assists the hero. Some type of amulet is provided to the hero that provides them with some power. And then something happens, some event that takes the hero out of their previous life into a different setting, a different environment. The hero enters a land of enchantment. They gain companions along the way. As a part of their journey, they face challenges. They use magic through the amulet that they've been given to accomplish their goal. And you can see here on the slides the various ways in which each hero carried out these particular components of the hero's journey. We turn now to religious text. We're going to talk about literalism and figurativism. We start with literalism. Literalism is the approach to understanding text that assumes that they are best understood without taking the words as similes, analogies, and metaphors. So in the case of the story, for example, that's taken from a literalist perspective, the Red Sea. The idea from a literalist perspective is that the Red Sea actually parted for a group of people to walk across and then closed up on its pursuers, that the world was created in 7 24-hour periods, and that a universal flood overran every continent worldwide, while two animals of every kind were herded into a boat, along with a man named Noah and his family. We turn now to figurativism. And in figurativism, the idea that words may mean more than they seem at face value. There's a lot more that needs to be considered from a figurativist standpoint. And if we compare the two side by side and contrast them, in the case of literalism, there's a one-to-one correlation. The word literalism relies very often on what's called proof texting, using the actual words of a text to prove ideas, concepts, ideologies. The priority is given for the written text, that whatever is contained in the written text is regarded as being true and is regarded as being enough to understand what it means. Priority is given for the reader's cultural context, that the idea that those texts have meaning for today and whatever the reader's cultural context is, that the text speaks most directly to that. There is less reliance on experts because of this, because the text meaning what it means, or that one-to-one correlation. This can lead to ethnocentrism because, again, taking the current reader's cultural context into consideration can cause, from a literalist perspective, a person to hold that as priority over everything else. Figurativism, contrasting to literalism, there's reliance upon knowing what the context and the intent of the writer is. There's more reliance on experts in this case to gain a deeper understanding of the intent of the writer and what was meant by the writer. Within figurativism, cultural relativism can be a help or it can be a problem when one looks at the idea of figurativism, that the approach of cultural relativism can be problematic where there are differences, cultural differences between the ancient text and the reader. And sometimes it can then lessen the relevance or the sacredness of the text. And the age of the text can impact the ability to understand the original meaning due to the lack of information being available. Scripturalism is a term that we apply to the idea of justifying beliefs and actions by reference to the religious text. And it is very much related to proof texting that we talked about a minute ago with literalism. Traditioning is the idea that religious texts hold relevance to life today. We now return to religious language. With religious language, it's more than just about content. That religious language is used to achieve a subsequent action. That's why the consequences of religious language is important. What is said in speech acts are important. Properly using ritual is important, and we'll learn more about the proper use of ritual and of language and why that is so strongly important. There are many cultures that believe that their speech acts have a demonstrable effect upon the world. Things that are said either through prayers, through incantations, through chants, through other things, have a demonstrable effect upon the world. They cause things to happen. Let's look at some of the functions of speech. What we call the locutionary force of speech is a factual statement that is either true or false. For example, the statement, the cat is on the table. We can see in this picture, somewhat humorous picture, that it describes the state of affairs. It is what it is. The cat is on the table. That's true. The illocutionary force of language is that a statement that has an effect that brings about a sense of affairs. The utterance that makes it so, it accomplishes the state of affairs. When the person pronounces this couple husband and wife, at that moment it's considered so in accordance with the particular religious ceremony. Perlocutionary force has a psychological effect upon hearers. In this case, this picture is one of the faith healer Benny Hinn, and his very often using his voice and using even songs in the context of his healing ceremonies to bring about the psychological effect upon his healers to provide them with a sense of healing. So what does it take for religious speech to be considered successful or effective? The first thing is that it must be performed correctly. When we talk about shaman and priests later, we will see how this idea comes into play. The speech must also be performed by someone who is authorized. When we look at, for example, the words said during a wedding, the person who says those words has to be authorized, have their authority to perform that wedding to be recognized either by civil authority or religious authority. The speech has to be performed within the right context in order to be considered successful or effective. We use a scenario of the wedding rehearsal versus the official ceremony. In the wedding rehearsal, the words are said that are very much used in the actual wedding ceremony itself. Generally, the religious practitioner doesn't say all of the words that are used there, but still it's very clear to everyone it's just a rehearsal. When the actual ceremony, which is considered the right context, takes place, then the speech that is used by the religious specialist and by the couple that is being married is considered to be the right context. And finally, the person performing the speech must be in the correct social, spiritual, or ritual condition in order to do so. We talked about that person having authority that is recognized by the culture and people within that culture, and they being the ones who can perform the particular religious acts or ceremonies, and they are in the right condition in order to do so. This concludes our part 2 of religious language and mythology.